Okay, well, hello. Welcome. Good evening. We're just going to wait. Naomi, are you here? Great. I've just wanted to do a quick housekeeping. Whoever is the host, I believe it's Brianna. Can you please make me co-host? Thank you. And welcome to Revival for Virtual and our fourth day today. And the Q&A panel. Just as you may already see this, we are live streaming to YouTube. So maybe you're joining us from YouTube, maybe you're joining us from the Zoom. My name is Magda Kaczmarska, and I'm very excited to welcome you all here today. Naomi, are you? I'm not seeing you.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Wonderful. So just a little housekeeping.
You missed a great workshop.
I know. I'm so sorry I had, but I am very happy to be here, that I was able to finish in time to come and join you for this. I was really so looking forward to having this opportunity to join you for this Q&A panel. So a few housekeeping things before I introduce our panelists, just so that all of us can see them. I'd like to invite all of you in the audience to please turn off your video. So that means that Miss Ellen, Marnie, Naomi, and Oliver, please do keep your video on. We want to see you. But everyone else, and if you are having any issues or troubles with that, we have several people on tech who can assist with that. And I am still not a co-host, so I cannot do that. But if whoever is the host, please make me a co-host, and I can also assist with the video.
I think Ezra is the host.
I see. Okay, Ezra, if you can please make me a co-host as well. That way I can help keep the video off. And since I do not have the ability right now, anybody else who is a co-host, please assist with any video that pops up so that our screen is clear for all the audience to see. Wonderful. All right, so now I can introduce you. Hello, hello. So whoever, again, is the co-host, thank you. So hello, everybody, and welcome one more time to the fourth day of Revival for Virtual. And with me today are Ellen Graff, a little wave to the one and only, there is only one Ellen Graff, and Marnie Thomas Wood, hello, and Naomi Goldberg, of course, who is our Artistic Director of Dances for a Variable Population. A big hello to Naomi. None of this would be possible without her. And our invited guest, Oliver Tobin, who is the Martha Graham Dance Company archivist. And we're very honored, and thank you so much for joining us here today. So as you know, we are here to talk about the wonderful works that Ellen and Marnie made together for Revival 4. But before we begin, I mean, it's probably a no-brainer, but I'd love to hear from Oliver. If you can tell us a little bit about how you know Marnie and Ellen.
Goodness.
We want some juicy stories up in there as well.
Well, doing the quick math on this goes 18 years now when I showed up at the Martha Graham School in 2002, February of 2002, to take one of my first dance classes, not just in Graham, but in the umbrella of dance. And they were both in the batch of my first teachers. So Ellen and Marnie were one of my first dance teachers and my mentors in Graham, and were directors of the school. I was there. Marnie was the director of what was then called the Martha Graham Dance Ensemble, which is now known as Graham 2. So we've done a lot of very special creative projects and educational projects with each other over the years. And Marnie and I currently, for I think the past 5 years now, have co-taught at Adelphi University in Long Island.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Well, welcome. We're so honored to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So Ellen and Marnie, you have worked with DVP for quite a few years now. And each year you bring an incredible and very different piece, even though often you do draw on your lineage with Martha Graham. And today's theme is legacy. So this is a perfect theme for that. Can you speak a little bit about this year's piece that you made?
Ellen,
Well,
Whichever one wants to start first. Can you
Marnie,
talk about why you chose to make this specific dance?
Well, as you've said, we have over the years we've drawn upon our own dance history in the work that we've done, and upon these ideas that are in this work as well, that movement is expressive, and that we tell stories with our bodies, and that we want to do this. And we've in the past we've worked with sort of using various different iconic works as a springboard. So one year we were thinking about Letter to the World, and we thought that the dancers that we're working with, as well as ourselves, we all have letters that we want to write to the world now. We have stories to tell. And how can we involve the dancers in this? So we have a history of working, I think, with trying to involve our dancers in a more collaborative way, with bringing their ideas and their expression into the work that we're doing. And of course, this year is totally different. And I think that after the first rehearsal, we were both tearing our hair out, and it's been such a learning curve. And it's been such an amazing experience, because the dancers have contributed so much, and they have been such a rich source for us in terms of the work that we've done. So, Marnie?
I think it's really been a very different experience each year. And again, Ellen and I have been doing it for several different, through various different casts and various different performances by the Dances for Variable Population. But what is really interesting has also to do with the fact that the themes that we've chosen each year have changed, although it has always drawn somewhat historically, but in any case, based on expressive movement, and been appealing to the dancers who've joined us. That has been a real boon in terms of finding dancers who are really ready to jump in and contribute along the way. Usually, the buildup leads to weekends in a park outdoors with tons of people and a whole nother sense of how we build something. So this whole project of this year completely shifted the approach. And, the parks are for next life.
Well, it was really extraordinary watching the process, because I would peek in every so often. I was in the background, and I saw how the dancers really took on a lot of ownership of the movement. They owned whether they were creating movement based on certain gram moves, certain gram positions, but really they just every single dancer really grabbed themselves and just were charged with making something, which I loved.
Well, that
Great.
really felt that change and that happening. So, and it was brought about by the conditions that, again.
Yes. Yeah. So it's so obvious that it was very personal, that, each person's contribution was incredibly personal and was directly related to what you're trying to go after, the expression that is, it's settled in gram technique. I never thought of that.
I think that's great, though. Thank you.
If I could just bring Oliver into this a little bit, because I think that, as we were struggling to try to create this dance in ways that where we began by, we tried to teach a warm-up, and that got almost nowhere. We did that the first week, and how do we communicate in this new medium that we're having? And then the idea of using something archival, Oliver, so that we could use that as a place to move on from. And I just was wondering about how you see that sort of role within the Martha Graham organization, as well as what's been happening with a project like Immediate Tragedy that also was drawing on archival information.
Yes, I mean, even pre-COVID, this is something that we've leaned on over time in order to reconstruct, or another term that's been used is reimagine, lost dances. And in particularly this period of time that we're exploring, which is the 1930s, where we may only have a few photographs, or we may have a snippet or various snippets of a film. I kind of liken it to a puzzle that you take out and then you're left with, maybe 25 empty pieces on the board. You have to use your imagination to kind of fill in those gaps. And that's what was done most recently with Immediate Tragedy that premiered last week through the company. The fascinating story to that was that a dancer in the 1930s, Nell Fisher, her boyfriend came to see the company perform at the Guild Theater in 1937, December 19th, 1937. And he was a photographer, and he sat in the front row and he documented the entire concert on film, photograph. And the negatives sat in his son's drawer for decades upon decades. And when he passed away and they were cleaning out his stuff, they found this envelope that said Martha and had all these negatives in it. And they turned them over to us, and we were actually able to reconstruct the evening. So that, not just in concert wise, but in this particular dance, that was the impetus and the structure for Immediate Tragedy, was to take those photographs, which we were able to put in a successional series, and then fill in the gaps, much like what everybody was doing in today's activity, was finding the spaces in between. So you take the gesture, you take the photograph, and then using our vocabulary in the Graham technique, our language, find how we would get from A to B, B to C, and so on and so forth. This has been done quite often, actually, in the Graham canon. 2017, Virginie Messen reimagined a lost Graham solo from 1933 entitled Ecstasis. And that had even less information than Immediate Tragedy. Immediate Tragedy, we had, I think, 24 photographs that were very, very clear and showed a nice, clean kind of arc to the work. Ecstasis, there's maybe 4 at the most photographs by Barbara Morgan, photographs that you guys were inspired by. So that's where it was likened to more of a reimagination as opposed to a reconstruction.
It's fascinating, that idea of reimagining. It's fascinating.
Well, it's so similar
in terms
to
of where we're at now, in terms of dance, that, to how we can work with these very iconic forms, how we can actually grapple with them.
Exactly. And then just to round that out, I mean, that's kind of, that's the power of the archives right now, because in the past 4 years, we've been able to organize, catalog, inventory, and then digitize the entire collection. Some of you might have seen the New York Times article a few weeks ago, where the whole collection now has been delivered to the New York Performing Arts Library. The dance division now has obtained it, so it's going to be of use to the public, the world, in some time. But that's where we get to, when we find these things and we organize them, then we can use them.
Well, and thank you so much for that, Oliver. And it brings to mind, having had an opportunity to talk with Ellen and Marnie along their process, of this process that you used. You mentioned, the entry point into the making of this dance that Marnie and Ellen used, through photographs. But then you asked the dancers to do some research. Can you speak a little bit about that, either Ellen or Marnie?
Well, it was brought about because of the difficulties of working in this medium. But that was one thing we could do, that the photographs are online, and then I also photographed them and sent them to each of the dancers. So they had the photographs, they could really look at them. And I want to comment on something Oliver said also, that what became important was what happened in between the transition, and that was something that each dancer could own. So it was very exciting to watch how our dancers took them over and made them their own, so that they could reimagine or imagine or embody for themselves their interpretation of what these were. It was very interesting and exciting.
And the whole process could become organic. They could find
absolutely.
organic. And that's, I'm going to think about the idea of reimagining many dances with these techniques.
Yeah.
Well, also what was mentioned is that every dance that you've made, Ellen and Marnie, for Dances for Variable Population has included the individual voices of the dancers, of the older adults who have participated. But this especially, and others have commented in previous days of these Q&A panels, the format of this time period and the Zoom allows us to come into one another's homes. So there was this additional level of intimacy and individuality that each of the dancers in your piece really brought into the completed work. I'd love to actually ask Oliver, since I know you have a long-standing history with both Marnie and Ellen, can you talk a little bit about your reflections of this work compared to other works that you've seen of theirs?
Well, again, I think the key word that you used was intimacy, and it's an ironic kind of term to use in this setting because that's kind of the juxtaposition of social media and everything is that we're so removed from one another, but again we're very connected in this regard. And I think there's something very endearing in seeing people's home spaces and seeing how they behave in their home spaces or their home environments or their familiar environments and what that draws out of someone. When this whole changeover happened and we were moving to the Zoom model on the university level, like I have a very strict boundary with my students about, letting them in on my life to a certain extent. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, here's my living room. Like we're going to just jump to the end of what I don't invite you in for. And it's again, like what Ellen and Marnie were exploring with the company was the gestures that come from your place of being. And so I think these are the things that you kind of hope for when you're creating a new work is that authenticity.
Who you are, who you really are.
Yeah. And so I think that there's something very personal about this particular kind of work when you're isolated, you're by yourself, but you're trying to find a connection through a camera to others. Yeah.
And I think it was I feel like a broken record almost, but it was so palpable. And I think many of our dancers in our company have reflected on this increase of connection that we feel amongst one another.
I think one of the things also is that the dancers did identify, looking into photographs of Graham or of other dancers, or of even remembering their experiences with historical involvement with dance. And it, instead of rejecting it, they really used it to enrich what they were doing. And I think that was those positive outcomes of the whole experiment.
But the dancers really were very fluid in how they moved from they found a real fluidity.
That's right.
One of the things that we did, or asked them to do, was to create their own sort of narrative about working from one pose to another, what was happening to them emotionally or expressively as they went from one of these poses to the other, and to make that true of the Graham sequence as well, so that it didn't necessarily have to be Graham's story in any of these. It was their personal story as they moved through these fluidly through this movement. And then certainly that was true of their own when they created their own sequence of movement. And I think that's why it was fluid, because it was telling a story.
Stories are not always fluid. Not always, or stories are not always fluid. I want to hear from Oliver and also you guys have certainly educational projects that you worked on. The educational project you worked on specifically with Marnie and Ellen.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The educational projects you talked about that you had worked on.
Oh gosh, this goes back many years now. I think probably like 2003, 4, 5. There was a period of about 3 or 4 years where we were partnering with City Center and doing this really fabulous outreach program to all the public schools in the New York City area, where we would take a fragment of a Graham work that was being presented in the season, and we would teach, we would adapt that phrase into something a little bit larger, and we would go into the school system, literally everything from kindergarten up through seniors in high school, and we would teach the educational component of the work. There was one year that we did Graham's solo deep song from 1937. This thing that you that you had today, and we taught the history that was surrounding it, what Graham was doing and saying with that particular work. And then we would teach all of the students, regardless, they weren't dancers necessarily, these were like history classes, these were just general ed classes, and we would teach them the movement phrase and then how to build off of that in their own kind of phrasing. And then we would bring all those groups to City Center for a special performance by the Graham Company, where that particular work in its entirety was featured. So these were things that we had to kind of create on our own, the lesson plans and the outreach. And we did that for a few years together.
It reminds me of when you guys first started working with our company, with the older adults. You sort of worked with a little bit of that myth, but you went right into personal. You went right into what was important to the dancers themselves beyond Graham.
Well, which brings us back to these narratives that we had the pleasure of, if on the website you can watch the video, and the very last video before the final dance, where we hear some interviews with the dancers, Joyce, Gina, who speak about these narratives that they made for themselves and the evolution of those narratives. But also, I was struck by how not obviously how personal they were, but how they very much related to this time. And it felt like an outlet for voicing some of these experiences of this time.
Oh, Magda, this came up again and again at rehearsal, that people felt that this was they were so excited to be in this rehearsal space, this virtual rehearsal space, because of the ways in which it did address both the lack of the issues that have come up for us in this time, and the great social issues. And I think also that, if I can be a bit of a dance historian here, that these Graham works from the early 30s speak so much to those issues. And I know that in the recreation, Oliver, of immediate tragedy, that from the essay I read in the Times, that you've talked a lot about that, about how the expression may be tied to a time of the 1930s, but it continues to speak because we are facing these similar kinds of social issues today, and we feel about them, and we need to express something. And these was good, yeah.
I think it's interesting. The fact that in many cases, generations of dancers began for a while to really say, oh, Graham is old hat, we're moving on, this is a new world, whatever. To find in the midst of the pandemic and the mood and the political world and whatever, a place where there is an invitation to express makes such a difference to dancers, because so much has been pulled out from under in terms of the stage, the classroom, the daily classes, and whatever. But the fact that you can find a place to speak, to say what you need to say, and invent it on your own, belongs, and you belong to the other people that are doing it with you, has at least in this instance to be a very rewarding sense of the art itself.
That sense of belonging. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think we're all craving this more than ever right now. I don't think we ever don't feel the need to be connected in a community that sees us for who we are and accepts us for who we are. but I felt especially with every work that was a part of Revival 4, that there was this fantastic community and sense of belonging that individuals felt within their respective works, their respective groups, and as a whole.
If I can add on to that, I think that's also a very relative message to Graham's work in the 1930s, was the power of the individual, but the power of the collective individual. And you can see that in works like Panorama and Chronicle and kind of politically driven reactionary pieces that she was doing, is the power of people coming together to address social unrest. And so, here we are again, and this is even pre-COVID. This chapter is still very accessible to, I think, people of all ages and mindsets, because it's very relative to the human condition and what we're faced with.
Actually, having made a dance through Zoom, you're able to see everyone very close up. The act of the making is different. The making, you cannot make a dance the way you used to. You have to honor that.
That's right.
And that's to say nothing about the difficulties of what is your right leg and what is your left leg.
You don't worry about it. You don't worry about it.
That's not on a regular day.
You don't worry about it.
You can triple it once you're in the Zoom room. But it worked out fantastically. And I know I don't know if we have spoken about Will Kitchings, who was our videographer and video artist, who assembled each one of the dances and helped really translate the vision of for today's case, Marnie and Ellen, to really help create the ethos around this work. I just feel the need to give a big shout out to him, because he was incredible.
Great.
Yeah, and a round of applause to Will.
Definitely.
So at this point, I'd love to open the floor up, and I've already typed it into the chat, but if you are in the Zoom room, please do feel free to type in your questions into the chat. And if you would like to ask your question by yourself, just say, hey, I'd like to ask a question. Otherwise, just type in the question and I will ask it to Marnie and Ellen and well, all of our panelists. And one of the first questions I already have in here is from Simone. How did you, Marnie and Ellen, pick the 4 poses that you used for your piece?
We each took different areas from the Graham format. Literally, the scarf around the neck was Martha in Night Journey killing herself. The body bending over came literally from Clytemnestra in the going after Aegisthus. So we both chose moments with different dramatic sensations that the dancers did or did not have to follow through. But we presented them for what they were, and then basically you had 8 counts to put the string around your neck, and you might want to kill yourself like Martha did, or you might want to glorify yourself as Isadora, or you might, whatever. In other words, although we chose them from dramatic moments, or we didn't necessarily insist that they choose that same connotation when they were doing the movement from the Graham repertory.
I started with looking through the Barbara Morgan book and looking for poses that I thought were interesting and that were doable, meaning, you know, that I didn't want to have anything that was too much of a balance, or and then I thought about, because this is how I work, about some sort of narrative. What would be, how would one thing flow into the other? And so there wasn't an overarching agenda or a story to tell. It was more as if the photographs dictated the story that I would tell within my mind. And also that, as Marnie has said, the dancers were always told to explore what that meant to them, and to use that as a way to transition from one movement to another, because it meant moving from one emotional and expressive state into another one.
Yeah, I chose all bad girls.
So you had a theme.
Bad girls with scarves and early modern dance. And early American modern dance. So I have a question, because we're speaking about some of the archival work. Perhaps we have MJSNY. I'm not sure who this is, but their question is: are there films? Marsha. Okay. Are there films available on the internet of the Graham Company performing these original dances? And I'm assuming that Marsha is asking about the dances that inspired the photographs that were taken from that were photographed by Barbara Morgan that you then used.
Well, in the 4 that Marnie and Ellen used, Primitive Mysteries, Deep Song, Primitive Canticles, and Satiric Festival Song, in their original incarnation, no, those dances were performed very early on, and we don't have live footage of Martha dancing in those roles in moving image, but there are videos or films that were made later of Primitive Mysteries in the 1960s. Satiric Festival Song was actually another reconstruction that was done, I believe, in the 90s by Janet Elber and Diane Gray off of a series of photographs as well. But the archives do date back, moving image-wise, to the early 1930s. We have a very early film of Graham dancing Lamentation front to back. From my research on the film, I believe it's somewhere in between 1931 and 1933. And we have footage of Martha and her company dancing Heretic from a very, very early on cast. And the moving image library ranges from there. It's so vast, and a lot of it is available online through a few mediums. We have a partnership with Google Arts and Culture, where about 5 years ago now, I think, I think we have about 8 exhibitions now where you can see a lot of these films through that medium. And most recently, in response to COVID, we put together a series called the Martha Matinees, where we've been curating and hosting these mid-afternoon movies of
Graham Company. The Graham Company's put that together from Graham.
Yes, this is through the Martha Graham Dance Company, and this is featured on our YouTube channel, where Wednesdays and Saturdays, myself and Janet Elber host a matinee where we watch an archival film. We're in the chat talking about all the fun little trivia and tidbits about what we're watching, and then we pair it with a more recent version of that particular dance. So we've been able to go as far back as the early 1930s, late 1920s with our film, and then pair it with things from our recent seasons.
Well, thank you, Oliver. That's fantastic, because so that's Wednesdays and Thursdays on the Martha Graham Company YouTube channel.
Wednesdays and Saturdays, but you can always go onto our YouTube channel. There's a lot of fun gems up there, and then you can go to our Google Arts and Culture site. If you literally type in Martha Graham.
Kudos to both of you, to Janet Elber and you too.
Yes, that's fantastic. And I know that I'm sure some people in our audience will very, very much be checking into that. This is a question from Reina Das. Would you speak more about the relationship and relevance of modern dance, or the early modern dance masters, to the current contemporary dance scene, and also how to honor and integrate these masters in the present? So we have an entire research thesis, possibly book here. So let's see if you can try to wrap this up in a couple of minutes. Thank you, Reina, for your question.
Well, let me jump in just to start that the early works from the 30s, which represent a particular time in Martha's historical repertory, when she was.
Oh, we can't hear you, Ellen.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, something went wrong with the.
I've stopped talking.
You're back. You're back. You're back.
Oh. Okay. I wanted to speak particularly to these works of Graham from the 30s, which are so potent and have been rediscovered. They were out of favor for many, many years, but there's so many of them that spoke to the power of collective action And as opposed to the individual, which is where Martha went afterwards, but they are, in my experiences with the current Graham Company, they are works which have been meeting with a lot of praise from audiences since they've been majorly. Relevance to today, and I think Oliver has set panorama on teenagers over many years, and they have been it has become their story. So it's just interesting to see that we have this body of work that's 80 years old and how it speaks to us today in the times that we have today.
I always suspected it could. You're showing it does.
It does.
Ellen, on that note, could you share what you were sharing with Marnie and I in our meeting the other day about the timely definition?
Oh, sure. I have always, we all have our own ideas about Martha, and I've always sort of not been happy when people have talked about her art as being.
You're freezing.
Oh no! I think you froze.
You said you were not so happy about Martha's work being, and then you froze.
Labeled as timeless, and rather I see it as being timely within its time, and timely within an evocative of similar kinds of protest or emotion or anything within a variety of times. But it's not that it's static; it's that it's alive and can be reimagined. If we're going back to that word,
I love that word.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And then again, having both you and Marnie working with the DVP company, I know that you help reimagine this work in new ways, or at least the inspiration for some of that work with our company and the older adults in this community, which I think is also showing.
They make a totally new dance. They don't.
No, I know. But I'm talking about the inspirations that they bring into the dances. I think allows for that to be translated into a whole new audience, and it offers visibility for a whole new audience, which is very revolutionary in its own way.
To remember is that Martha changed so much over the many years that she was creating a response to her time. She couldn't look at some of the old works when she had moved on, because at the moment she was so engaged in the new generation of bodies, or it's now World War II. It's now working into her timing was really one of the gifts that she had that many people don't. She didn't stick with one thing. She didn't just do Panorama, or she didn't just do Night Journey, or she didn't just do.
Or people really want to cement her in one time or another.
Yeah.
And she didn't. And as a matter of fact, her whole take on what she had done was to get it out of sight. She didn't even want to see it anymore because she couldn't leave it alone. She'd change it and tear it apart and put something new in. And my husband was was rehearsal director. So he used to schedule secret rehearsals upstairs where she would hear the music and go, immediately want to see what they're doing. And if it was an old dance, he would want to change it all around. And then everybody would state of, what is she doing now? But that was her way of staying, again, within her time. And as it changed, she changed. And it's important to know that about her.
Yeah, I think that echoes to what we're faced with here in terms of remaining current and creating within the moment and responding within the moment and trying to find that thing that is pure, and then it transcends and can be relative regardless.
You're right.
Well, that's bringing us full circle to, sort of what we tried so hard, what we were trying to do with the dance that we made, which was to make these things be reborn within
whatever they were doing, whatever the new generation was doing.
But they were not, the people weren't new generation. The people we were working with had been around a long time. So, so whatever came out of them was from
as have we.
Working in a new way.
But the longer you live, the more stories you have to tell. And that is part of why I love working with this company and why I love seeing these dances, is because we get to hear these stories that normally we don't get to hear in the public sphere. And it's very exciting. And this does bring us back to the theme of the day, which was legacy, and the legacy of Martha Graham being re-envisioned through each of you. Just as we wrap up, we had one question, and this is, I think you've touched on this a little bit, but Gina asks, can Ellen, Marnie, and Oliver speak to what does a dance historian do? We could each of you addresses dance history in a very different way. And I think we'd all love to hear that.
Good ending question.
A dance historian is somebody who can look at the history of dance, but and I would say, as in terms of training, its change is there are different emphases at different times, and that in the time that I trained as a dance historian, there was a lot of emphasis on understanding social roles. I'm talking about gender and social issues and how they affected dance, and that's the work that I did was based on that. But some dance historians study old scores and are able to turn those old scores into new dances. It's a very wide field, and now I'll yield to Marnie and Oliver.
Well, basically, I mean, for the 30 years that I spent at UC Berkeley teaching dance history, a long period of time, I found that it needed to relate, obviously, to what was going on at the moment. Of course, we arrived at Berkeley at the moment when all the riots happened in the late 1960s, and dance was considered fabulous because it wasn't science and it wasn't the norm of the academic world. So suddenly we got this big boost, and students would come and get involved in dance history just because it was different than everything else that happened on campus. But again, over the years, what really became the important message was how to relate history to reality and not be talking about something removed. And even if you're talking about a different time, even if you're talking about a whole different culture, what really makes it alive for the people to whom you're speaking? And that, I think, was what, again, as I said, over the 30 years of being at Berkeley, it changed so tremendously. So did the people coming and wanting to hear. So you needed to find out as well, what do they want to hear and what haven't they heard that you get them reacting to.
Where did it end up, Marty? Where did this story end up with what you said, what they went through these changes when you left? What was it when you left?
When I left Berkeley, they went so much back into the academic without being as involved in what people really do in terms of dance. The time that I spent there, we had a company, we toured, we had guest artists, so along with history came the actuality of learning, of performing of, and now it has become a very academic subject in which you graduate and should go and teach at another school where there isn't dance.
Yeah. Some seems sad to me.
Very sad to me.
To teach the history without having an opportunity for application.
That's right. So it made a huge difference to have an active.
Yes, I imagine so. Yes.
As part of the learning process. Oliver.
I also think one of the responsibilities in a dance historian is also and one of the jobs really is you're trying to figure out what happened. You know, what happened 100 years ago, 50 years last week. You know, and you know, history is, I mean, the theme of what today's presentation is, it's legacy, it's handed down. And three people can hand down three different ideas or memories of what happened. Or when we find a batch of photographs, or we find a film, or we're studying Graham's mindset when she made something, or another artist made something, we're trying to figure out why they did that, what was taking place, and then what does that mean? And we're kind of trying to crack the codes, I guess. Or speaking back to the puzzle, we're trying to find those missing pieces so that we have a clearer picture. That's one of the things that I find is my daily job every time I walk into the Graham building. What happened?
Well, okay, so let me pose a question to you for our closing question. We have three dance historians looking at Ellen and Marnie's piece. What, if you had this jigsaw puzzle, what would you say why was this piece made, and what would you take out of it? What's some takeaways from this dance?
This is for me?
For all three of you, just for our closing.
Oh gosh. I bow to the choreographers first and foremost, so Ellen and Marnie.
Well, basically, what I think it's about is making an attachment to how you pour yourself into communication, whether it's through dance or whether it's through writing or whether it's listening. If you are really, and part of what I felt was today's job was not to speak to the people that were watching as if they were dancers, but to speak to them as if they were for an interesting, inviting way to get involved. And that's different than if you're talking to people who are training to be dancers. So coming out of this piece that Ellen and I made, I feel like we have an assignment to think in terms in all areas of living, not just in dance. That makes dance more interesting if we can get out of our own.
We're certainly in agreement with you. We are in agreement with you.
Good.
Bring the dance into our living rooms.
Bring the dance really truly into our lives.
Yes.
Thank you.
Would Ellen or Oliver like to add to that? Because that felt like a really great summary to me.
You said it well. I think
The contribution as well. I mean, you guys have contributed a piece of work and you brought people together, and it's what we need on a regular day, but especially now. And you know, we moved together and we got to see a performance, and then this conversation has been fabulous, and that has shifted us, whether we know it or not. So it's a contribution that has helped us out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen, you want to say anything?
Ellen.
I think a key word that we came up with again and again, it was about conversation. How can we have a conversation with each other? How can we have a conversation within this particular kind of structure? And was always, you know, we worked very, very much with that idea from beginning to end.
And with that, I want to thank you for this conversation that we've had now. That was a little cheesy ending, but I'll take it. And I certainly hope that this is, and I think this is a conversation that we will continue to have, not just in these virtual spaces, but in all the spaces that we're currently inhabiting. I want to thank Ellen and Marnie for the beautiful work that you've done with DVP and for this festival. Oliver, Tobin, thank you so much for joining us and bringing all of your experience and wealth of knowledge to this space. Naomi, thank you for making everything possible, making this whole thing happen. And to our audience members, if you'd like to come up and say hello, thank you for being here today, for joining us. For those of us who are watching us live, thank you also. And know that we have one more day left in the festival. Tomorrow, its theme is celebration. And you'll get to see all of the dances as well as the finales. So please join us tomorrow at 6 for a live-streamed live performance and Q&A with all of the guest artists. So that we get to have some inner dialogue between all of them. It's going to be super exciting. So one more time, the website is www.revival4.com. And one more time, a big round of applause to all of you here, to the panelists, and to everyone who's joined us. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Applause of hands.
Thank you.
And thank you to our tech crew for doing all of the tech support with this, which is not easy. You are amazing. Bowing down to you. Thank you. You make it possible for us to do all of this. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
I have a lovely evening.
Stay safe, stay well.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Right.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye.
Bye. And whoever, Rebecca, are you the lead right now? So whoever is the lead host, we can end the meeting and we'll say goodbye for now until tomorrow.
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Is that still Ezra?
Ezra.
Ezra, if I'm gonna text him right now and tell him
We're trapped on here.
we're trapped in virtual land. Let me text him really quickly and make sure that he gets this message. Okay, I'm also gonna text Krista.
Awesome.
Oh, I think she's on this message.
Who's that other person?
That's Krista.
It is?
She's, yep.
That's a different number. Is it? Yeah, what?
Okay, so she's ending the live stream. And let's see. Still don't know who the host is. If I need to, I think I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna log, I'm gonna see if I can end.